Hello. How is that level-wise? Hi, Christy. It's great to see you. I hope that the music can still be heard somewhat. I don't want it to be too loud, but I don't want it to be too quiet either. So I guess just yell at me if I need to change that at all. But hello, we're finally getting back to some book comparisons. We've got Death by Design coming. I'm gonna lower it just a smidgen. So yeah, I hope that everybody's having a good week. I'm sorry I haven't been as active. Again, just trying to balance life and streaming, and unfortunately life obviously takes more of a precedence, so all of that to be said. Today I'm going to try to read, we read through chapter 5. I'm going to try to read through chapter 11 today, which is 6 more chapters, because math. And we'll see how far we can get. I think that'll be just fine, though, as far as timing goes. So I'm expecting about an hour and a half as normal. Hi, Moocher. It's a read stream. Aren't you excited? So it should be about an hour and a half, which is normal for read streams for Nancy Drew. Is there a red sun in the U.S.? I don't think so. Our sun looks pretty normal today. It's been very foggy today, which is unusual, but life got me busy as well. I hope you're doing well. I am doing well, and I hope you are as well. I'm excited for the Pokemon games that come out in like 3 weeks, so I'm excited to be playing those. Alright, so go grab yourself something nice to drink, whether it be, you know, something like lemonade or soda, or if you want to go fancy with some coffee or tea, or even something fancier than that. This song is... Whoa! Yes. Okay. Yeah. Woo. Oh, it's my cam? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for playing your song. Oh, I need to turn that off because this is not a blind playthrough.
Beautiful.
You're beautiful. Take that. Got him. I think it's my lamp on my desk here. It's got a very orangey bulb, so that's probably why the color temperature looks a little reddish. This is a blind read-through. No, actually, I have read this book before. Okay. Without further ado, if you guys are all ready and cozy, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Chapter 6. There's no need to throw us out of here, Nancy said as calmly as she could. Lena halted on the landing and looked doubtfully up at her. Bess and I are definitely not spies, Nancy went on, and I'm sorry if I gave you that impression. I was just looking at the pin you were wearing and wondering where you got it. What pin? Lena asked. The silver one on your scarf, Nancy blinked. There was no pin on Lena's scarf now. Did you take it off? She asked Lena. I haven't taken anything off, Lena said. Would somebody please explain what is going on here? You were wearing a silver pin with a ruby in the center, Nancy told her. It was just like the one Kim Daly had designed. Now Lena was staring at Nancy. Are you all right? She asked. You really don't look well, you know, and I definitely don't know what you're talking about. But, Nancy stopped. Her thoughts were whirling. Lena had to have been wearing the pin, otherwise why had she thought Nancy was a spy when she caught her looking at it? But what if there really hadn't been a pin on Lena's scarf? What if Nancy had just imagined it? Chills began to creep up Nancy's spine again, and all of a sudden she felt much too exhausted to think about anything except bed. I'm sorry, she said, leaning against the wall. I must have made a mistake. Did you see a pin on Lena's scarf, Bess? I wasn't looking for one, Bess faltered. I didn't notice, Nan. Neither did I, said Paul. Okay, Nancy said tiredly. As I said, Lena, I'm sorry. It's been a long day. Maybe we can talk tomorrow? Let's go, Bess. Nancy collapsed onto her bed the moment they got back into their suite. Ugh, she moaned. Did I just make a fool of myself or what? You never make a fool of yourself, said Bess, sitting down on the edge of the bed. But what exactly was that all about? Sorry, I'm adjusting this. I could have sworn Alina was wearing another copy of that silver and ruby pin that Kim designed, said Nancy. You know, like the one Kim yelled at Morgan for wearing? I'm sure she took it off on the stairs after she noticed me looking at it, but I'm not positive. I guess I could have imagined it, only I never do things like that, do I? Never, Bess told her. Of course you have been sick. I know I have, but I'm not delirious. Nancy's voice was more confident now. She must have slipped the pin off, and that means there's definitely a connection between Lena and Morgan, but what? Well, whatever it is, it'll keep till tomorrow, Bess said. You should get some food and rest, Nan. Stop thinking about the case and concentrate on dinner instead. I'm starving, and you should be too. You know what they say, feed a cold, starve a fever, feed a virus. She grinned. At least I think that's what they say. I'm not really hungry, Nancy said. Go ahead and order something for yourself, Bess, and get me a glass of milk. I'll drink it in the bathtub. I am freezing. I want to take a nice hot bath for about 10 hours. 45 minutes later, Nancy crawled into bed. Now, are you sure you're okay? Bess fretted, tucking an extra blanket around her friend. I'll be fine tomorrow, Nancy said. Thanks, Bess. Boy, she thought drowsily as she pulled the covers up under her chin. The fashion world is a real-life soap opera. Paul loves Kim. Lena loves Paul. Allison loves Paul. Kim hates Paul. Lena hates Kim. And who knows how many other people hate Kim, too. Morgan, Sarah, every gossip columnist in Chicago. All those people, any one of them could be a murderer. Well, Bess was right. There was no use thinking about it now. Nancy snuggled down into her pillow and fell asleep. She was walking down a model's runway dressed in a floor-length black velvet dress. It was swelteringly hot. No one had told her what to do, and she wasn't quite sure she'd put the dress on right. As she walked down the runway, she suddenly heard people scream. Startled, Nancy glanced into the audience where Bess and Ned were watching her with absolute horror on their faces. What was wrong? Suddenly, Kim rushed out from behind a curtain. "The pin! You forgot the pin!" she shrieked at Nancy. "The outfit won't work without it!" She pinned a huge silver and ruby brooch onto Nancy's dress, but it was so heavy that it pulled Nancy forward. She was falling. Nancy sat up in bed, sweat pouring off her face, her heart pounding. She pushed off all her covers, but it didn't help. Frantically, she rushed into the bathroom and splashed cold water on her face. "Nan?" she heard Bess called sleepily. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Nancy said. "Just hot, that's all. Sorry I woke you." Now her teeth were chattering. This water is too cold, she thought fretfully. She groped her way back to bed, where she slipped under all available covers. Then she curled up into a ball. Shivering, she waited for the bed to warm up. It was a long, long time before she fell asleep again. When she woke up, Bess was standing beside the bed, dressed in an oversized yellow sweater, denim jacket, and jeans. "You were sleeping so soundly I didn't have the heart to wake you," Bess said. "Do you want some breakfast?" "Give me half an hour," said Nancy with a yawn. "I'll meet you in the lobby." When Bess had left, Nancy stumbled to the shower. How can I still feel so tired? She asked herself as she stepped into the steaming water. Even lifting the soap seemed like more trouble than it was worth, and getting dressed was worse yet. When she'd finished brushing her hair, Nancy felt ready for a nap. As she was leaving, she noticed a piece of paper lying on the floor just in front of the door. Nancy picked up the thick paper, which had been folded over once. Her name had been typed on it with some kind of electronic printer. Slowly, Nancy lifted the top half and began reading. "Dear Nancy Drew, I'm sorry that I can't reveal my identity, but in a minute you'll understand why. My case is not against you. I'm sure you're a nice person. You just got in the way accidentally, and I'm really sorry. It's not really my fault, though. Blame Kim Daly, not me." Blame Kim for what? Wondered Nancy. Frowning, she read on. "Please take this very seriously and do what I tell you. Get to a hospital right away. That poison was not meant for you." "Poison?" Nancy gasped. She continued the letter. "But it's fatal. If you're not treated within 72 hours of the time you got the dose, you will die." End of chapter 6. Nancy imagining pins now. She needs shock therapy. Never. You're perfect and never wrong, Nancy. "You were sleeping so soundly I didn't want to disturb you. It's 4 p.m. Thank you for the claps. I know, poison. Poison! The poison is chosen to kill Kuzco. Kuzco's poison. Puffy. Hi, Disney. How are you guys doing today? Thanks for popping in. Ah, I win. Emperor's New Groove is an underrated movie. We need to be talking about it more. I'm glad you're doing pretty good. I'm going to continue reading. Chapter 7. The note fell from Nancy's hand and fluttered to the floor as she sat down on the edge of her bed. Her mind was reeling. Slowly, she picked up the note and read the message again. I'm sure you're a nice person. You just got in the way. If you're not treated within 72 hours of the time you got the dose, you'll die. Nancy's hand was trembling so much that the words were a blur. It can't be true, she whispered. But it had to be true. Everything fell into place. The way Nancy had passed out at lunch the day before, her inexplicable tiredness, the flashes of intense heat and cold she'd been feeling, it all made a horrible kind of sense. I don't have a virus, Nancy said aloud. I'm dying. Panic was stifling her. If she didn't get control of herself, Nancy knew she would faint. She leaned forward, put her head between her knees, and forced herself to count to 20 very slowly. Then she stood up. First things first, she thought to herself. And the first thing I want is to have Ned here. Nancy knew she'd never get through this crisis without him there to support her. She dialed his number quickly. And when he answered on the first ring, Nancy was utterly speechless. Hello? Hello? Ned said. Who's there? Ned, she said finally, trying to sound as normal as possible. I'm glad you're home. Hi, Nan, Ned said jubilantly. Feeling better, I hope. Well, not exactly, Nancy said. Listen, Ned. What's the matter? He asked instantly. A lot. I hate to screw up your vacation, but I've got to have you here with me. I can't even ask you if it's okay. Nancy's voice was wobbling. She cleared her throat and went on. I just have to have you here. Can you drive to Chicago right away? I promise to explain everything when you get here. Ned didn't ask any questions. I'll leave now, was all he said. Thank you, Nancy said. I love you so much. I love you too. I'll be there before you know it. Now to call Hannah. Somehow Nancy had to try to get in touch with her father. Hannah, it's me, she said. I was just wondering, did Dad leave a number? Oh, no, nothing at all. He said there was no number to leave. Why, is something wrong? Suddenly, Nancy could not stand to tell her just how wrong everything was. If she couldn't get in touch with her father, she didn't want Hannah to know what was the matter either. Nothing important, she said casually. I just wanted to see how he was doing. Don't try to pretend with me, Nancy Drew, said Hannah. I know you too well. What's going on? Come on, get out with it. It's nothing, really, said Nancy. I just need to pick his brains on some legal stuff. Guess I'm out of luck, but if you should happen to call in, could you do me a favor and ask him to give me a ring, okay? Not okay, said Hannah. Now you tell me what's going on. You sound terrible. Nancy took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. Must be this connection. I have to run, but please tell Dad to call me. Thanks. Love you, bye. She hung up before Hannah could say anything else. Okay, that's out of the way, she said to herself. Now I have to leave a message for Bess. She picked up a piece of hotel stationery and scribbled a note to attach to the note from the poisoner. Wow, I'm having a hard time. Don't panic, it said, but after you read this, take it to the hospital for a fingerprint check. I'm going to the nearest hospital. Be back as soon as possible. Then she paused. Her heart was fluttering in her chest like a wild thing trying to break free. She could barely catch her breath as she left the suite for the elevator. Bess was waiting in the lobby, impatiently tapping her foot. Her face lit up when she saw Nancy. What took you so long? Listen, the cutest guy just went into the oak room. Let's eat in there so I can... Bess, listen. Nancy interrupted. I cannot explain right now, but please go up to our suite. I left a note for you and I'll try to get back as soon as I can. She hated to leave Bess without telling her what was going on, but she didn't have the strength for an emotional public scene. Bess was looking disappointment. Can't you at least clue me in? No, said Nancy tersely. I have to go. Thank you, Bess. As Bess headed for the elevator, Nancy approached the front desk. Where's the nearest hospital? She asked the day manager. There's a very good hospital at Sandburg Terrace. It's about a 10 or 15-minute drive. Nancy raced out the front door and hailed a cab. Hurry, please, she begged the driver. It is an emergency. Okay, miss. The cab lurched forward, zoomed down the street, then slowed to a crawl and stopped. Uh-oh, the driver said with a chuckle. I forgot, it's Celebrate Scandinavia Day. An endless parade strolled with maddening slowness down the street. Nancy felt so tense she wanted to scream. She leaned forward in her seat. Driver, is there a side street? Is there another way to Sandburg Terrace? Only if I make a U-turn, which wouldn't be too smart with that cop standing right there. I do see him, Nancy said, but I have been poisoned and I need to find a doctor. Please make the turn. The driver turned around in his seat and grinned sarcastically. That's the first time I've ever heard that one, he said. Pretty good, lady. Nancy looked straight into his eyes. "Do I look as though I'm kidding?" she asked. The cabbie's eyes widened. "No, you don't, now that you mention it. Okay, you got it." He spun the steering wheel. The cab leaped into a sharp 180-degree turn, swerving out of the path of a truck whose driver let go with a string of curses. The police officer blew his whistle angrily as the cab shot past a yellow warning sign, made a tire-screeching left turn, and headed toward Lakeshore Drive. Nancy had been thrown back against the seat of the cab when it turned. "Please don't get me killed before I get to the hospital," she panted, "but don't slow down because you're doing great." Still, the 5 minutes it took to reach the hospital's emergency exit seemed agonizingly long. Thank you, cried Nancy, jumping out of the cab before it had even come to a full stop. She thrust some money into the driver's hand through the window. "Please keep the change," she said over her shoulder. She dashed away. "You earned it." She ran to the admissions desk and told her story to the sleepy-eyed woman sitting there. "I'm afraid all of our doctors are busy," the woman droned. "I really don't know when—" "I don't have time to wait," Nancy cried. "Please help me." The woman thrust a sheet of paper at Nancy and spoke in a mechanical voice. "Here, complete this form. Return it to me. Then you can take your seat over there with those other people. Please, As soon as you've completed all the forms, I'll put you on the list to see the doctor. Those are the rules." Nancy could see that it was hopeless. Silently, she filled out the forms and sat down. The next hour was the longest one she'd ever lived through. Try to relax, Nancy told herself, but she couldn't make herself sit still. She paced restlessly back and forth, watching other patients come and go and listening to the maddeningly calm voice of the woman at the admissions desk. At last, a nurse came to the door with a sheaf of papers in her hand. "Nancy Drew?" she asked. "That's me," Nancy said, jumping to her feet. "Come with me, please," said the nurse, and led Nancy down a hall until they reached a little room in an almost deserted wing. "You can have a seat, dear," the nurse said casually. "The doctor will be along in a minute." Nancy sat down tiredly and leaned her throbbing head against the wall. In a minute, the door swung open and a middle-aged woman appeared. "Miss Drew? Hello. My name is Margaret Liston. What seems to be the trouble?" For the first time since she'd read the note, Nancy relaxed. Dr. Liston was a quiet and attentive listener, and as Nancy poured out her story, she was suddenly confident that things would turn out right after all. "I'm going to order some blood tests immediately," the doctor said when Nancy had finished describing her symptoms. "We'll send them to the pathologist and see what turns up. I'm afraid you'll have to wait a little longer for the results. They're about an hour." This time, Nancy forced herself to sit still. She knew she might as well get some rest while she could. Grimly, she fixed her eyes on the wall clock in front of her. An hour later, Dr. Liston returned. "I've got the lab report here," she said, her face absolutely expressionless. The news is both good and bad. The good news is that we've managed to identify the family, the general category of poison in your system. And the bad news, said Nancy, forcing herself to speak calmly. Dr. Liston's voice was grim. "The bad news is that we haven't been able to pinpoint the exact poison, and that means we can't prescribe an antidote." "I'll try them all," said Nancy eagerly, "if you've got a basic idea of what kind of poison it is." The doctor shook her head. "Those antidotes vary too much for us to take that kind of chance," she said. "If we were to use the wrong one and it interacted with the poison in your system—" She shook her head. "That's a risk we just can't take." "This is unbelievable," Nancy cried. "What am I going to do?" "Well, you're certainly not going to panic," said Dr. Liston firmly. "We'll work on this until we've got the answer. What I'd like you to do is check into the hospital right away. That way we'll be able to keep you under surveillance around the clock." "I can't do that, Dr. Liston," Nancy said. "I've got to keep working on this case. If I can track down the poisoner, I'll be able to identify the poison. I mean, the poison wasn't meant for me. Surely whoever the culprit is will tell me what kind it was." "I don't think that's a safe assumption," said the doctor quietly. "But the poison wasn't meant for me," Nancy repeated, her voice trailing off as she realized how hopeless it all sounded. "I do realize you want what's best for me," she added, "and I'll do anything you ask, short of checking in here. I hope you don't think I'm being unreasonable." The doctor sighed. "I don't. After all, if you succeed, you'll be saving 2 lives, yours and the intended victims. But please make sure to call me every couple of hours. Our lab technicians are really good, and the minute we get an answer from pathology, we can treat you. Every second counts, but I guess I don't have to tell you that." Nancy smiled sadly. "No, you don't." The cold air outside the hospital was unexpectedly refreshing. "I'll walk back to the hotel," Nancy decided. "A little exercise will get my brain going again." Firmly, Nancy pushed every trace of panic out of her mind as she focused her thoughts. She knew the poison she'd gotten in the way of had been meant for Kim, but when had the poisoner's mistake occurred? Nancy had shared some food with Kim, it was true, but only tea and cookies, and both Kim and Bess had the same foods at the same time. Why hadn't either of them been poisoned? "And what about the dog?" Nancy suddenly said out loud. A woman walking next to her gave her a startled look and veered away to the edge of the sidewalk. Chanel must have been poisoned accidentally as well. The Yorkshire Terrier had drunk the tea meant for Kim, so the poison must have been in the tea. But again, that was the same tea Bess and Kim had drunk the day before without any ill effects. At least Nancy could tell the vet that the dog had definitely been poisoned. Maybe the animal hospital pathologist might identify the poison. Nancy had been puzzling over these questions so intently that she hadn't been paying any attention to her surroundings. She looked up now to see that she was on a side street that contained nothing but expensive boutiques, the kind with locked doors, which were only unlocked if a potential customer looked rich enough to shop there. Nancy knew she had to get back to the hotel quickly, but still she slowed down slightly so she could window shop for a couple of blocks. A British leather goods shop, a Swiss chocolatier, a shop specializing in antique wedding gowns, a high-fashion dress shop named Mystère. Well, that was appropriate anyway. Nancy stopped to look at some of the dresses in the shop window. Wait, she thought, what's that rack of dresses doing back there? They were certainly beautiful. Short evening dresses with strapless white silk tops above deep-toned velvet skirts in crimson, peacock, and emerald. The contrast in fabric and color was as striking now as it had been when Kim had introduced a dress just like them in her last show 2 months earlier. It had been her first attempt at designing formal wear. It had been her first attempt at designing formal wear for adults, and it had been very well received. But that design hadn't been part of Kim's ready-to-wear line. It had been intended as a one-of-a-kind garment. What were these dresses doing here? Nancy decided to inspect them more closely. She pressed the shop's buzzer, and in a minute a gray-haired woman walked to the front of the store. She gave Nancy a quick look and evidently liked what she saw. "What can I help you with, my dear?" she asked in an unctuous voice when Nancy was inside. "I'm just looking," said Nancy. The saleswoman's face tightened slightly, but in a second it was all smiles again. "Those are pretty ones over there," Nancy continued, walking toward the silk and velvet dresses. "Yes, those are beautiful, and they'd look just lovely on you, dear," said the saleswoman, "but they might be a little out of your price range." "Wait, what are you doing?" "Just checking the labels," Nancy said. "Kim Daly's one of my favorite designers. These are hers, aren't they?" I believe so, but you'd have to check with..." "But doesn't Kim always put her own label in her clothes?" Nancy asked innocently. "Why do these have a Mystère label?" The saleslady's smile was very forced. "Did I say those were Kim Daly's? I must have made a mistake." "But they are Kim's," said Nancy. "They're Kim's design anyway. Would you mind telling me who your supplier is? Would you mind getting out of my store right now?" The saleswoman's mask of cordiality had vanished entirely, along with her slight French accent. "You're not a shopper, are you? Are you on Miss Daly's staff?" "Well, you could say I was shopping for information," Nancy said smoothly, "and now I have it, so thank you very much." She unlocked the door and let herself out before the saleswoman could say anything else. I was right, she thought. There was only one way dresses like those could have made their way into a store like that. Someone must have stolen Kim's design and copied it. Someone was ripping her off, and it was probably the same person who was trying to kill her. End of chapter 7. Thank you for shouting out Puffy and Disney. Is the music still okay? Ned, yeah, I've been poisoned. Yeah, again. Dad is poisoning someone legal. Don't panic, but I am going to the hospital. Nancy wasn't the target. She was at the wrong place at the wrong time, yeah. There's no time to explain. Nancy gets some water and stands around. Yeah. Appreciate Scandinavia Day. You are judging his driving that you insisted he do poorly. Oh, your poison sucks. Here, have some children's cough syrup. $50. I'll try them all. Pops all the pills. Why would the culprit reveal the poison they use? I feel if they were going to do that, they would have done that in the apology note, you dumb Drew. Maybe the human doctor was a quack and bad. She should try the vet instead. Listen, time is of the essence, which is why I gotta make sure to admire the dresses. I like how that rhymed. Hashtag just girl things. Dress shopping's more important than the concern of the poison. Music's fine? Okay, cool. Enjoy work, Puffy. Thanks for lurking. Alright. Shall we continue? Chapter 8. The first thing Nancy saw after she pushed her way through the revolving door into the Hamiltons' lobby was a forlorn, hunched figure sitting in a chair near a window. It was Bess. The minute she saw Nancy, she rushed to her and almost knocked her down with the force of her hug. "Nancy, I've been so worried," she gasped. "You're still alive?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Sorry, I'm just being such a dope," she blurted out. It's just been horrible waiting for you." Bess pulled out a tissue and blew her nose vigorously. Tell me exactly what's going on, she said. Are you okay? You look so pale. I'm fine, but let's sit down. I'm exhausted, said Nancy. The walk back to the hotel had completely worn her out. Safely enfolded in a large easy chair, Nancy told her friend as much as she knew about the poisoning. By the time she finished, Bess was in tears. I took the note to the police, she said, but there were not any fingerprints on it. I couldn't even tell if they believed me, Nan. All they said was for you to call them yourself. Don't worry, Nancy said, patting Bess on the shoulder. What we've got to do is figure out a way to get in touch with the poisoner. She thought for a minute. I guess the only way to do it is to be straightforward. Next to the information desk, Nancy had noticed a billboard covered with news relating to the upcoming fashion show. Schedules showing the times each designer would be previewing his or her spring line, advertisements for limousine rentals and catering services, locations of the nearest parking garages, anything that the designers and their staffs might find helpful. She and Bess walked over to it now. Well, Nancy said after she'd studied the board, this looks like a perfect spot to place a classified ad. She pulled a piece of paper and a pencil out of her purse and sat down to compose her message. See what you think of this, she said to Bess after a few minutes. Accidents can happen. They're completely understandable. Will whoever gave ND that surprise package please contact her as soon as possible? Best meeting place, the Grand Ballroom, 3 o'clock. But deadline is 72 hours. All replies confidential. It seems fine to me, said Bess, but I don't like the idea of your meeting with this person, though. Aren't you worried? Of course I am, said Nancy, but we'll be in a very public place. Anyway, what choice do I have? None, Bess sighed. Nancy checked the clock. It was almost 2 o'clock. Let's hop into the Palm Court, grab some lunch before it closes, she said. Bess just stared at her. You can eat at a time like this? Isn't that usually my line to you? Nancy rejoined with a smile. This is not the time to stop taking care of myself, and anyway, I need to see if Kim's in there. I've got some interesting news for her. Kim was in the restaurant. She was sitting at her favorite corner table with a subdued-looking Morgan. Kim had her back to Lena's table, where Lena was sitting with Paul and Allison. Even if Kim couldn't see them, Morgan could, and kept darting nervous glances at the table. Well, the whole gang's here, Nancy murmured to Bess. Just what I was hoping for. And she strode over to Kim. There you are, Kim greeted her. I've been looking all over for you. Where were you this morning? Oh, I had some things to do, Nancy said vaguely. Listen, Kim, I passed a store on Colchester Street called Mystier. Do you know the one I mean? I think so, said Kim. The stuff they carry isn't too interesting, but it's well made. Especially what they're selling now. You're not going to like this, but someone's been ripping off your designs. They have a whole rack of silk and velvet dresses like the one from your last show. Whoever copied it did an awfully good job, too. Kim stared incredulously at her. But that dress is one of a kind, she protested. You must have made a mistake. I didn't, Nancy said simply. They're definitely copies. My design's been stolen? Kim yelled. Who's the thief? I tell you, I can't take much more of this. A sudden hush fell over the restaurant. Crimson with embarrassment, Morgan muttered. Kim, don't you think? Don't you tell me what to think, screeched Kim. Can you imagine what it feels like to have your work stolen from you? Well, this is just what I wanted. Everyone knows about the theft now, Nancy said to herself. And there are a lot of suspects in this one room. Paul, Lena, Morgan, Allison. Let's see what happens. But the results were more dramatic than Nancy had bargained for. Before she could turn to scan the room, Kim had stalked over to Lena's table. You did it! You always wanted to ruin me! She screamed. Miss, please, think of the others. The maitre d' had arrived at Lena's table almost as quickly as Kim. Sweating profusely, he tried to take Kim's arm, but she shook him off. Kim, Paul began. You shut up, Paul! I bet you're in on this, too. Don't bother, Paul, said Lena forcefully. Her face was pale. Whether from anger or from fear, Nancy could not tell. Kim knows I wouldn't waste my time on her designs, don't you, darling? Kim's mouth twisted with rage. She took one step forward and grabbed Lena by the throat. I'll shake the truth out of you, she screamed. Horrified, Nancy got up to rush to Lena's table, but her legs were too weak to hold her. She fell back into her chair just as Paul pried Kim's fingers away from Lena's throat. Be careful, Paul, Allison wailed. She'll hurt you too. I'm okay, Paul grunted. Panting, he took both of Kim's hands and pressed them down hard on the tabletop. Get a hold of yourself, Kim, he said in a very calm voice. What's the matter with you? Kim took a deep breath and miraculously relaxed. I'm sorry, she said. I don't know what got into me. I should think not, the maitre d' said indignantly. I'm afraid I'll have to ask... Kim wrenched her hands free from Paul's grasp and grabbed Lena by the shoulders. I'm not through with you, you thief, she said through gritted teeth. Lena reached up and slapped Kim full in the face. I'm no thief, she said. You're just a sore loser. You can't stand the thought that I'm becoming a bigger success than you, can you? Don't bother, she snapped at the maitre d', who began making futile little noises of protest. I'm leaving. I can't be bothered with her. With one swift gesture, she shook Kim's hands off and rose. Then she walked out of the room. Not a customer in the restaurant was even thinking about eating. The waiters were standing still. Everyone was staring avidly at the scene being played out. Everyone except Nancy. She was trying to think why Lena's voice sounded so familiar. It was something about the way she said the letter S. Sore loser. Success. The words had a whistling kind of sibilance that Nancy had heard very recently. That telephone call to Kim. That was where. Lena's normal speaking voice sounded nothing like the voice on the phone, but now that she was upset, the similarities were obvious. Lena's the poisoner, Nancy thought, and if I don't get to her soon, she'll be my murderer. End of chapter 8. I've been poisoned, Bess. That's the whole story. Nancy Drew is relying heavily on the stupidity of this poisoner. Yeah. Trust the poison, pin imagining girl. Trust the poisoned, yeah. Kim, you need to chill out. Quick, Kim, slap everybody. Only I would have thrown hands if someone had slapped me in the face. Yeah, for real. Thank you for the claps. I want to read 3 more. We're like blasting through these. I kind of knew today was going to be a little bit shorter, but... Chapter 9. Gradually, the restaurant quieted down as the diners returned to their meals and hushed conversations. Lena had left, Paul and Allison following after her, and a waiter had quickly cleared their table as if to erase any trace of them. Kim had stalked out, too, with a mortified-looking Morgan in tow, but Nancy didn't notice any of this. Nancy, what's the matter? I mean, what are you thinking about? Nancy turned to face Bess. She'd been concentrating so hard she'd almost forgotten Bess was there at all. It's the poisoner, she said quietly. I think I've figured it out. Bess, it's... Nancy? I've been looking all over for you. Nancy turned eagerly. Ned! Oh, Ned! She gasped, flinging her arms around him as he rushed toward her. I'm so glad to see you. I'm glad to see you too, said Ned. I worried about you for the whole drive, and I practically had to knock the desk clerk down to get a room here. Nancy, what's going on? I don't want to intrude, said Bess delicately, but shouldn't we talk about this somewhere else, like back in our suite? Good idea, said Ned. Here, let me take your hand, Nan. You do not look too good. Are you feeling okay? I'll tell you upstairs, Nancy said grimly. She was feeling weak and shaky again, and it took all her strength just to keep walking. When the 3 of them reached the girls' suite, Nancy collapsed gratefully onto her bed. Ned sat on the bed next to her. Now tell me, he said. Nancy sighed. Ned, she said haltingly, I've gotten myself into a horrible situation. I don't know what I did, or what was done to me, but I've been poisoned. The hospital hasn't been able to identify the poison yet, and it is deadly. If they can't come up with an antidote, or if I can't find the poisoner on my own, I'll die in less than 48 hours. As she told him the story, every bit of color drained out of Ned's face. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Don't look like that, Nancy said quickly. Seeing him so scared only frightened her more. I know I can find the poisoner, especially now that you're here. I get these attacks of weakness once in a while, but the rest of the time I feel pretty good. We'll have to work fast, of course. Without a word, Ned leaned forward and lifted her into his arms, and at his touch, Nancy's resolve broke down and she burst into tears. Ned, this is so awful, she whispered into his chest. I always knew I loved you, but I never knew how much until I knew I might never see you again. Ned cleared his throat. I love you too, he said in a husky voice. And we're gonna lick this. I know you won't leave me. I won't let you leave me. You'll see. He hugged her hard and then sat up again. What can I do to help? He asked, handing her his handkerchief. And me? Bess asked. She sounded as though she was trying to make her voice as bright as she could. Don't leave me out, you lovebirds. Unfortunately, I don't really know what any of us can do, Nancy said wryly. Well, there is one thing. Ned, could you make 2 calls for me? One to Dr. Liston, just to see if they've come up with anything, and one to the animal hospital. I thought I was going to sneeze. Nancy knew that Ned had to take some kind of action. As he began dialing, Nancy fell back against the headboard and closed her eyes. In a few minutes, Ned hung up dejectedly. Nothing, he said. The hospital still hasn't found anything, and neither have the vet's pathologists. But they don't. They don't expect the dog to make it. Oh, Nancy, Bess whispered. Let's not even think about that, said Nancy resolutely, sitting back up again. We've got something else the three of us need to work on. How did I get poisoned? Bess and Kim have eaten the exact same foods I have, and they're both fine. I mean, I realize that there are other ways for poisons to enter the bloodstream other than from foods, but... What do you mean? Asked Bess. What other ways? Well, poisons can enter the blood directly, the way they do, like, from a snake bite, Nancy explained. But nothing's bitten me, and I don't have any puncture Suddenly she stopped. The pin, she whispered. The pin on Kim's dress, it pricked me when I tried the dress on. Bess, help me remember, Nancy said. When did I start feeling sick? During lunch in the palm court, said Bess. I'd been taking Sarah to get her cut fixed up, and you'd just come from Kim's studio, Nancy finished triumphantly, where I'd tried on that outfit. It's got to be the pin. And Lena was wearing one just like it, Bess pointed out. I wonder if she's involved. I'm sure she is. Quickly, Nancy described what she'd noticed about Lena's voice at lunch. So all we have to do is... Then her face fell. Oh, she said disgustedly. Lena's not the only person who has a pin like Kim's. So does Morgan, remember? Morgan was right here when Kim found out about it. Maybe Morgan and Lena are in this together, Ned suggested. Maybe. Or maybe Paul's the only person involved, Nancy said. Her head was spinning. He saw me wearing the dress to lunch with Kim. He could have realized then that I'd been pricked and sent the letter to warn me. Slow down, said Ned. How did the poisoner know you'd get pricked? Am I missing something? The pin was left unclasped, and the odds are good that anyone would prick herself closing it. It probably wouldn't take much of a prick. At least that's what I'm guessing, Nancy explained. We could make a case for Paul, for sure, Bess continued. You know, the jilted boyfriend, and speaking of jilted, what about Allison? She obviously worships Paul. Maybe she wants Kim out of the way. I still think Lena's our culprit, Nancy said, picking up the thread, but we can't eliminate any other suspects yet. I wish we could, said Bess. Nancy smiled slightly. Well, there's more than just poisoning going on here, she said. There was that exploding paperweight, remember? That seems like an inside job to me. And then we have the copies of Kim's designs at Mystere. Phone calls, bombs, poison, and design theft. That's a lot of activity for just one person. So what you're really saying is that there could be more than one mind at work here, and that's pretty much everyone whom Kim knows is a suspect. That's about it, Ned, said Nancy. That's about it. She stood up decisively. Well, it's almost 3. Time for me to meet the mystery poisoner. That is, if he or she saw my note. Do you want us to come? Bess asked nervously. As backup? Actually, Bess, I think you could be more helpful if you'd get that pin from Kim and take it to the hospital, Nancy said. Tell Dr. Liston about it. I'm gone, Nancy said. Bess said. I'll just go get my coat. When Bess had left, Nancy turned to Ned. Hey, she said softly, giving him a sad little smile. Hey yourself. What do you want me to do, sleuth? Well, I want you to come with me. I could use your kind of backup. Let's go, said Ned. He bent down and kissed her. When this is all over, he said, we're going to have the biggest celebration we've ever had. I can't wait, said Nancy. This was the first time the grand ballroom had been empty since Nancy and Bess had arrived at the hotel. Work crews had been there almost constantly setting up for the show. Floodlights were installed, a runway was built, and row upon row of chairs were brought in. Now, though, the place was empty, like a stage set before the show. Nancy felt as though she and Ned had just walked into some kind of nightmare stage. The opulence of the ballroom's high, ornately carved ceilings and parquet floor contrasted strangely with the stark racks of lights and huge speakers hung on the walls, waiting to blast out loud rock music. There was a sense of hushed expectancy in the room, as if everything had been set up just for this meeting between Nancy and her poisoner. It's 3 now, she whispered to Ned. I mean, it's 3 now, she said aloud. Maybe whoever it is didn't see my note at all. Just then, a side exit door opened, and Paul Lavelle walked in, Allison Haber directly behind him. Hello, Paul, Nancy said quietly. Her heart was racing, and her palms were damp. Sorry. But she wasn't going to let him know how nervous she was. Nancy, Paul said genially. Boy, that was some scene at lunch, huh? What a bunch of crazies we hang out with. What are you doing here anyway, auditioning for a modeling job? Hardly, Nancy answered, her tone icy. Let's not waste time on small talk, Paul. You know I've got to hurry. Paul just stared at her. Whoa, I'm totally confused. Allison, is it just me? He grinned at Lena's assistant. You know what I'm talking about, Nancy said. Please, Paul, if all I did was get in the way, you've got to tell me what kind it was. What kind what was? Paul asked after a second. Please stop this. You saw my note, didn't you? Why else would you be here? Note? Nancy, I'm just here to check out the lights. Stop jerking her around, champ! Ned burst out angrily. We both know you poisoned her. Ned, please, I can handle this, Nancy whispered. Turning to Paul, who now looked completely stunned, she said, the person who accidentally poisoned me was supposed to be here at 3, and here you are. It seems like a pretty funny kind of coincidence to me. You're insane, Allison cried. Paul would not do something like that. Paul spread his hands helplessly. What can I say? She's right. I mean, I wouldn't do something like that. And if you think I did, you are insane. I think that what happened is that you saw me and you got cold feet, Nancy said evenly. Sure, I've got cold feet, Paul snapped. I'm surrounded by crazy women these days. The only one who's not jumping on me is Allison. I've had enough. I'm out of here. And he strode angrily toward the door. Ned blocked his way. Where are you going? He asked. You try to kill my girlfriend and then you call her crazy? Ned, Nancy said, calm down. I can see that both of you are crazy, Paul said airily. Get out of my way, Captain America. I'll get you out of my way, Ned shouted. And he hauled off and punched Paul in the stomach with all the strength he had. Paul keeled over without a sound. His head hit the floor with a thud. Allison gave a terrible scream. Sobbing hysterically, she rushed over to Paul and threw herself down beside him. Then she looked up at Ned, her face a ghastly mask of grief and horror. You killed him! She shrieked. End of chapter 9. I need a tissue. It's fun having Ned in a mystery. I feel like we don't get this a lot. Blast them chapters. So if you die, I'll be single again. Bruh. Gosh, Nancy, way to make this poisoning all about you and your boy toy. I'd rather Nancy die than the dog. I know. Nancy has 9 lives and been in worse situations. Ned suggests something, Nancy shoots down his theory immediately. On brand. Bess accidentally poisons herself. Yeah. Oh boy, Ned's angry. He used champ. Oh great, Ned's gonna throw hands. Knew it! You called it. Ned then yells at the woman, and you're next, champ. Thank you for the claps. All right. Chapter 10. Nancy bent down to take Paul's pulse, but her fingers were too stiff to close around his wrist, and she was trembling. You murderer! Allison screamed at Ned. Her eyes were slits of hatred. Ned was staring aghast at Paul. I don't know what came over me, he stammered. I never meant to... Nancy tried to speak, but there was something wrong with her voice. Suddenly the room was spinning around her. Faster and faster it whirled. Spots of bright red and yellow danced in front of her eyes and waves of nausea washed over her with sickening speed. I'm falling, Nancy thought to herself just before she hit the ground. As if from miles away she heard Ned calling her, but she couldn't even lift her lids to look for him. Velvety blackness swooped her up and carried her away. It was all just too much for her, I guess, came a familiar voice. She hasn't been feeling well, you know? Nancy opened her eyes. Hi, Bess, she said weakly. What are you doing here? I got worried. I came looking for you and I heard screaming, Bess said. You fainted just as I was running in the door. Then Nancy remembered what had just happened. Paul, she gasped, struggling to sit up. And Ned, Paul's okay, Bess said quickly. She put an arm under Nancy's shoulders and lifted her up. I mean, he's not dead. I called an ambulance. They're getting him now. 2 paramedics were lifting Paul gently onto a stretcher. Allison was hovering over him, tears streaming down her cheeks. Why can't I come with you? She asked rebelliously. I won't get in the way, I promise. Sorry, miss, said one of the paramedics sympathetically. Really, it'll be easier for everyone if you stay here. You can call the hospital to check on his condition, and I'm sure they'll let you visit. Besides, don't the police want to question you? What police? Nancy turned quickly and almost fainted again. 2 officers standing at the main entrance to the grand ballroom were putting Ned in handcuffs. Ned! Nancy gasped. He tried to move toward her, but the police officers held him back. Take it easy, you're not going anywhere, one of them told Ned gruffly. Except with me. The two of them began to lead Ned out the door. "Don't worry, Nancy," Ned called back over his shoulder as he was pulled away. "Get some rest. I can handle this alone." He waved at her and then disappeared around the corner. "No, I've got to come too," Nancy cried. Before Bess could stop her, she had struggled to her knees, but another wave of faintness washed over her and she sank back to the ground again. "I can't believe you want to go with him," Allison said tearfully as Bess helped Nancy to a chair. "When he practically murdered Paul just for walking into this room. We're not here because we saw that stupid note. We came in because we have work to do." "If I've made a mistake, Allison, believe me, I'll be sorrier than you," Nancy said wearily. "Bess, can you help me upstairs? I really do not feel well." "Of course, Nan. Here, give me your hand," Bess said. "We'll have you back upstairs in no time." It seemed like ages to Nancy, but at last she was back in bed in her room. "Oh," she groaned as she relaxed against the pillow. "I can't believe how awful I feel. What time is it?" 3:45, said Bess. Nancy groaned again and closed her eyes. The whole horrible thing had taken less than an hour. Less than an hour for Ned to be arrested, for one of her prime suspects to be sent to the hospital, for Nancy's confidence to be completely shredded. If Paul hadn't seen the note on the bulletin board, had anyone? "Did you get the pin?" she asked Bess, her eyes still closed. "Please tell me something positive for a change." Bess sighed. "I can't, it's missing. Kim and I looked everywhere for it and we can't find it. I'm sorry, Nan." "Great," Nancy said. "That's all we need, isn't it?" "There's one more thing," Bess said hesitantly. "Nan, the vet called Kim. Chanel's dead. She died at 3 this afternoon." Nancy winced. "Poor little thing," she said. "Poor Kim, too. She really loved that dog." She shivered. "And if Chanel died so quickly, what does that say about my chances?" There were tears in Bess's eyes. "Don't talk about that," she begged. "I'm going to try not to think about it, not till I've had some sleep. If I don't get a nap, I'll never be able to keep going. I'll get out of here right now. How about if I come back in an hour?" "That'll be fine," Nancy said sleepily. When Bess had left, Nancy turned over and buried her face in the pillow, but the sleep she was longing for didn't come right away. No matter how desperately she wanted to, she couldn't shut out her thoughts. Who was the poisoner? Her very life depended on the answer to that question. There was Paul, who owned the voice distorter and who'd shown up at the wrong spot at the right time. There was Lena, with her strange speech impediment and her imitation version of the poisoned brooch. And there was Morgan, with dozens of reasons to hate Kim and an imitation brooch of her own. Those cheap imitations were just like the imitations of the one-of-a-kind dresses Kim had designed. Too many suspects, too many copies. Were they all implicated? There was one more suspect, Nancy reminded herself. Allison. Allison had been at the grand ballroom at the right time, too. She was crazy about Paul, so much so that it didn't seem impossible that she might want Kim out of the way. Was there any chance that she was the poisoner? It didn't seem likely, but neither did anything else about this case. Nancy finally felt groggy again and snuggled into the pillows to fall asleep. It seemed like only minutes before Bess was shaking her gently. "You'd better get up if you don't want to sleep straight through till morning," she said. "Thanks, Bess," Nancy mumbled. "Did you call the hospital? Has my dad called?" "Yes to the first question, no to the second. The hospital is still working on it, but I'm sure they'll come up with the antidote soon. No word from your dad, and someone taped this to your door," Bess added. This was a cream-colored envelope, and the sight of it instantly jerked Nancy awake. Her heart pounding, she reached out and took the envelope from Bess. The typeface was just the same as on the other anonymous note Nancy had received. "I thought so, my friend's back," Nancy said grimly. She handed the note to Bess. "Now I know that you deserve to be poisoned just as much as Kim does," Bess read aloud in a shaking voice. "You can forget about the antidote, too. You're just as bad as Kim is, and you'll die just the same way she will. I'll get you in the same ways I mentioned in my letters to her." "Nancy, what are we going to do?" she wailed. Wait a minute," Nancy said rapidly. "There's something that doesn't fit here. If I weren't so sleepy, Wait, I know what it is. Kim hasn't been getting threatening letters. She only mentioned phone calls." "Boy, this case makes me want to pull out my hair," Nancy added. "Maybe there are two people involved, one who's been making phone calls, and one who's been trying to poison Kim. And don't forget about the stolen designs," Bess reminded her. "Maybe there are 3 criminals." "Well," Nancy said bitterly, "I guess all we have to do is eliminate the people who aren't suspects. That'll make things a lot simpler." "Don't talk like that, Nan," said Bess. "I know you can figure it out. At least Paul's out of the running for this note," she added, brightening. "He's in the hospital." "That's true. I guess he's not the letter writer, so he's probably not the poisoner either. I'm starting to think that Morgan put the poison in the pin, and the pin and the exploiting paperweight seem like inside job to me. Maybe Lena stole the designs." "How?" Bess said blankly. Bess, let's just take one thing at a time, Nancy said with the first smile she'd smiled all afternoon. And let me get out of bed, she added. This definitely isn't one of those cases that can be solved from an armchair. She dragged herself out of the bed and stumbled into the bathroom where she turned on the cold water full blast and began splashing her face. Is it just my imagination, she asked herself, or is the poison already starting to make me look different? In the mirror, her eyes appeared huge and sunken, making them look haunted, her face thin and pale. Well, there was only today and tomorrow left. Don't think about it, Nancy ordered herself. She snapped off the faucet and walked back into the bedroom. Before I do anything else, I've got to find out what's happening with Ned, she said to Bess. Nancy shook her head and dialed the local precinct. He must really have snapped, she said, or he'd never have attacked anyone. I'm almost sorry I called him. Hello, this is Nancy Drew. I'd like to get some information about someone who was brought in for questioning earlier. His name? Ned Nickerson. Has he been released yet? Released? When he's been charged with assault and battery? Said the gruff voice at the other end. He's not going anywhere unless it's to jail. End of chapter 10. Chapter 10, yeah. Yeah, Ned's just running around yelling champ and punching people in their stomachs. Maybe if you were a better detective and didn't window shop, nobody would have died. Maybe everyone's guilty. We need Ned to punch everyone. Can't listen because I'm at work, but glad to see another Nancy Drew read aloud. We'll watch the VOD if you're leaving it up. P.S. Love the absolute 80s look on this cover. Yes, me too. Hi, Auburn Dusk. How are you doing? It's good to see you again. I think it's been a while. Yeah, I'll be leaving the VOD up, and then in 3 days it'll go up on YouTube as well. I feel angry assault boyfriend is less important than solving poisoning. Yeah, me too. I feel like poison should be #1 priority here. But what do I know? I feel like my eyebrow looks strange. I don't know. Okay. Anyways. Okay. Chapter 11. Click. The line went dead before Nancy had a chance to say anything. When are they releasing him? Bess asked as Nancy hung up the phone and sat down. They aren't, Nancy said in a dull voice. They're charging him with assault and battery. Tears filled her eyes. She brushed them away angrily. Sorry, it's no use my getting upset. I just feel bad for Ned. He'd never have gotten into trouble if he hadn't been worried about me. I hate this case. Nancy, Bess said logically, Ned's only been charged with assault and battery, and he wouldn't want you to waste time worrying about him now. He'd want you to keep trying to solve this case so you can find the antidote, and that's what I want too. You're right, of course, said Nancy, wiping away the stray tear that had escaped down her cheek. Thanks, Bess. Bess leaned forward and gave Nancy a quick hug. I'm sorry for being bossy, Nan, but we need to keep thinking clearly. You can let me be the mushy emotional one if you want. All right, said Nancy with a smile. I'll do that. She jumped to her feet. Let's start thinking about which suspect we want to see first, she said briskly as she paced back and forth. Paul's temporarily off the scene, of course. I'm sure Allison's with him. Lena's preparing for her show, so we can't talk to her now, and that leaves Morgan Daly. You know, Bess, we actually don't know much about Morgan except how horribly Kim treats her. I think I should speak to her. Want me to come? Bess asked. No, there's no reason. You just relax for a while, and I'll meet you back here when I've finished talking to Morgan. But finding Morgan turned out to be easier said than done. First, Nancy had to talk to Kim, and Kim was in a terrible mood. What did the hospital say about the poison? She asked the minute Nancy walked into her office. Nothing yet, said Nancy. They've been in touch with pathology labs all over the country, but they still haven't been able to identify it. Great, Kim snorted. So I guess we just sit around and wait for you to die too. The expression in Nancy's eyes must have given Kim pause. She reddened and turned away. Sorry, she said. It's been a horrible day. I'm sorry about your dog, Nancy told her sincerely, and there was a long silence. Do you have something to tell me? Kim finally asked. Actually, I have something to ask you, Nancy said. I'd like to have a word with your sister. Do you know where she is? The hotel pool, probably, said Kim. I gave her a break and she always tries to get in some exercise when she can. She sounded as though she considered that a personal fault of Morgan's. But what does my sister have to do with anything? Kim went on. You don't think she's involved in this, do you? I'd just like to talk to her, Nancy said carefully. At this point, we can't rule anybody out. Kim smiled a little scornfully. I suppose you mean I've got a lot of enemies, she said. Well, that's the way it is when you're on top. Once again, Nancy was silent. How could you talk to someone like Kim? Try the pool, Kim said again. She's probably there, and tell her to get back up here when you're done with her. When you're done with her? Nancy repeated to herself as she got into the elevator. Kim made it sound as though I'm on my way to beat Morgan up. Nancy could smell the chlorine at the entrance to the pool. She leaned against the heavy door and walked in. There was only one person inside the dimly lit pool, Morgan. She was doing solitary laps, stroking hypnotically through the water with a grace she didn't have on land. She didn't notice Nancy, or she pretended not to. She just kept swimming steadily back and forth. At last Nancy went and stood next to the aluminum ladder leading up out of the pool. This time, as Morgan turned her head out of the water to breathe, she did see Nancy. Her eyes widened and she turned her head away as she kept swimming, but now her movements were choppy and awkward. She knows I'm watching her, Nancy thought. Morgan, she called, I really need to talk to you. Can you come out now? Let me finish this lap, Morgan gasped back over her shoulder. As she came closer to where Nancy was standing, she began to swim more and more slowly, and when she finally began to pull herself out of the water, it was as if her whole body shrank away from Nancy. Nancy couldn't wait any longer. I don't know if this strategy will work, she thought, but I've got to try it. She's hiding something, and I've got to find out what it is. Morgan, I know all about it, she said, and I think you're in over your head. Come on, tell me the truth. Fear flashed like lightning across Morgan's face, and she froze with her hands on the ladder. Okay, I'll tell you everything, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Suddenly Nancy relaxed. It was going to be all right at last. Thank you, she said, and she meant it from the bottom of her heart. But could you give me the antidote first? She asked. Now Morgan looked confused. Antidote? What antidote? You mean you don't know what the antidote is? Nancy asked. I don't know what you're talking about. Morgan hadn't said it indignantly. She genuinely sounded bewildered. And all of a sudden, Nancy was absolutely convinced that Morgan did not know what they were talking about. Morgan, someone poisoned me by mistake, Nancy said. It was your sister they were after. You've been poisoned? Poisoned? Yes, just like Chanel, only I'm pretty sure the poison that was on the ruby pin. I'm pretty sure the poison was on that ruby pin Kim designed. I pricked myself with it, and now I've only got about a day and a half to find the antidote. Morgan pushed herself up the ladder. Still staring at Nancy, she walked as if in a trance to a nearby bench. She picked up a towel and began drying herself. Her eyes still hadn't left Nancy's face. All right, thought Nancy, I believe that you didn't poison me, Morgan. And there we go with another 1 step forward, 2 steps back development in this case. Feeling utterly defeated, Nancy sank down onto the towel floor and put her head on her knees. Suddenly she lifted her head again. Morgan, she said, you were about to tell me everything. Everything about what? What did you think I was talking about? About Lena, of course, Morgan said simply. I thought you'd found out about her somehow. Found out what? Nancy asked. Wrapping herself in the towel, Morgan walked over and sat down next to Nancy. I was so afraid you'd found out about this, she said with a sigh, and now it seems like nothing at all compared to the fact that you've been poisoned. I let Lena inside Kim's workshop about 10 days ago. A sob shook Morgan's body. I was so angry at Kim. She'd been screaming at me all day about something I had nothing to do with, and she'd bawled me out in front of the whole staff. Not that that's anything new, it just seemed worse than usual that day. So when Kim went out to dinner and left me there alone, and when Lena came to the door and said she just wanted to look for a book of models she'd lent Kim, I decided to go ahead and let her. I even went into another room while she was in Kim's office. I knew I shouldn't have let her in, and I just didn't care. She gave Nancy an anguished look. And she must have been trying to kill Kim. And now you might die because of my stupid mistake? I'll never forgive myself, never! But think how much you're telling me this has helped, Nancy said comfortingly. Now we know that Lena's probably the poisoner, but wait, how long was she in there? How could she get a hold of the pin, apply the poison, and put the pin back on the dress without your seeing? She must be incredibly confident. Wait, now that you mention it, she couldn't have done it, Morgan said incredulously. Not during that visit, anyway. I was in the workroom with her all the time. She was only alone for a minute in Kim's office. The designs for the dress and the pin were in the workroom, and the dress was at the pressers with the pin on it. The pressers? What's that? Nancy asked. That's where we send all of our new designs. After they're finished, Morgan explained. Any new design has to be pressed before it's worn, and you have to use a professional presser. Our fabrics are so expensive we can't risk trying to iron them ourselves. What's the name of your presser? Nancy asked excitedly. At last there was development in the case that might lead somewhere. He's Raphael Orsini, said Morgan. Most of the top designers in Chicago use him. So it's possible that Lena or whoever the poisoner is got into Orsini's shop and poisoned the pin there? Yes, Morgan said. It's completely possible. Unexpectedly, she smiled. You don't know how relieved I am, Nancy. If I'd had to spend the rest of my life knowing Lena had applied poison to that pin because of my mistake, I can't even think about it. Of course she must have been doing something in there, Nancy said. Morgan's face hardened. Yes, and now I know what it was. A few days after I let Lena into Kim's office, she said she had a present for me. It was a copy of Kim's design for the ruby pin. I knew it was an imitation of Kim's design, but I took it anyway. I thought it was very nice of her to think of me, Morgan said scornfully. She must have stolen the idea when she was in the office. And she gave you the pin to brag that she had stolen it, Nancy put in. Morgan shivered suddenly. I should really go and change, she said. I'm freezing, and the pool will start getting crowded in a few minutes. It always does at dinner time. Sure, said Nancy, getting to her feet. And then maybe you'll tell me how to get to Mr. Orsini's shop. When will it be? Will it still be open? Until 6:30. But are you sure you should go right now? Morgan asked. You do look awfully pale. And I feel awfully pale, Nancy thought. I can't take a break now, Morgan, she said. I just can't. But I do appreciate all the help you've given me. Truly, you've been more helpful than anyone else I've talked to so far. I'm glad. And Nancy, good luck. I mean it. Nancy smiled. I'll keep you posted, she said. Of course I'll come with you, Bess said a few minutes later. Let me just grab my purse. She darted into the adjoining room. I'm so tired, Nancy thought. I've never been so exhausted in my life, and my head is pounding. If I could just get some air. She trudged over to the window and wrenched it open. A welcome blast of fresh air filled the room. Nancy sat down on the windowsill, breathing in the cold gratefully. And in that split second, dizziness hit her like a tidal wave. With a sickening lurch, her body swayed sideways, and before she could catch herself, before she could even scream, she was falling backward out the window toward certain death. End of chapter 11! Maybe Ned should control his anger better, yeah. She's drying herself. Hi, Oscar. I don't know if this will work or not, but I gotta try it. Nancy yells, Champ! And punches Morgan into the pool. Thank you for shouting out, Oscar. Dinner time, the perfect time to swim? I guess so. Claps for chapter 11. Good lord, I know. I feel like this is, this book has some crazy things in it. It's still not as crazy as the Blackmore Banner book, but it's pretty crazy. And that's going to be a short stream for today, friendos. We're only at an hour and 7 minutes, but I read to where I wanted to stop today, and I want to do the last third of the book next time. I mean, no cult here. Yeah. Thank you guys for hanging out with me today while I read Nancy Drew. I hope that you enjoyed it. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, thank you for your patience. I know that it takes me a while to get streams done and uploaded, but I appreciate you being patient with me, and I hope that you are enjoying them when they come out. Please have a good rest of the day, everybody. I'm going to see if anybody's streaming that I want to raid, because we haven't raided in a while. Nope. So I hope you guys just have a wonderful rest of the day. Please take care of yourselves. As always, much love from me to you. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.